The Gospel according to Ant. Hi, and thanks for joining me on this second leg of my Portuguese adventure. A couple of days ago, we flew from London Heathrow to Lisbon, where we indulged in a 2-night stopover, before heading to our final destination, Funchal, the capital city of the island of Madeira. On the first part of this series, we explained all the reasons for this long-winded set of flights. Because sometimes, it's not just the destination that makes a trip memorable. It's the journey that adds that extra spice to the whole experience. As I mentioned on the previous video, the first leg of this journey, London Heathrow to Lisbon, Lisbon to Funchal, we're doing in business class. So after a 20-minute metro ride from our hotel to Lisbon's Humberto Delgado airport, we arrive at the old, dated and crowded Terminal 1, heading immediately to the business class designated check-in desks, where we drop our bags. We arrived just after 1 PM for our 4:35 flight. Not so much for the "let's get to the airport early" kind of thing, but more to sample TAP's business class lounge at its main hub. I remember visiting it back in January 2007 between connecting flights. Back then, the lounge experience was quite underwhelming. The flight experience was not one to brag too much about either. The long-haul flight we took from Caracas was in an old dated Airbus A310, even by those days' standards, connecting to an A320 to London. Like all my previous flight experiences with TAP, I could not fault the onboard service. The only thing back then that was in desperate need of upgrade was their hard product, something that has changed radically for the better in the past 10 years. We were about to discover if that improvement extended to the lounge. Well, let's say there is still some work to do here. Small, crowded, more akin to a shopping mall's food hall, without the choice, sadly. Their Lisbon's lounge is probably the biggest shortfall in TAP Air Portugal, only saved by their bar, which was well stocked and well attended by hard-working barmen who were quick to serve and on occasions concocted some interesting cocktails. Again, our flight displayed as on time. We headed to the departure gates, some 10 minutes from the lounge in the domestic Schengen area. We arrived just as the aircraft had plugged into the air bridge, arriving from somewhere in Germany, as I could tell by the German nature of what the deplaning passengers were speaking in. As we waited for boarding to start, a large congregation of passengers assembled. A full flight, it seemed. Like in London, the passengers were organised in 4 queues, depending on where we sat in the plane. Again, we were greeted by TAP's friendly cabin crew and took our seats, this time in row 2. This Airbus A320neo was configured very similarly to the aircraft we took from London. And just like that plane, the cabin here was bright, immaculate, with that new and clean feel to it. Pushback on this rainy Lisbon afternoon was also on time. As we taxied to the runway, the purser made the usual security and pre-takeoff announcements in both Portuguese and English, despite this being a domestic flight. Soon after, the captain took over describing the flight path. A westbound takeoff would see us leave Lisbon to then take a southwestern route over the Atlantic until reaching Madeira, where we'd veer to a slight north to land at Cristiano Ronaldo's international airport. Flight time for this leg around 1 hour 45 minutes. Once cruising speed and altitude was reached, the cabin service began. A simple but well-presented light meal was offered. This consisted of a selection of Portuguese charcuterie and cheeses, together with a warm crusty bread roll, followed by a fresh tasty pastry and a small bowl of fruit. To wash it down, I chose a red alentejo, which, despite the altitude, cabin pressure and all that, tasted a dream. As it was, I needed a second top-up, to make sure I had made the right choice. Maybe my expectations were higher, but despite the meal being on the tasty side, I still expected a bit more of a premium element to it. After all, this was business class. But to be honest, I've had worse. The cabin crew, however, were very attentive, friendly and accommodating. Soon after the trays were cleared, it was almost time to start our descent. Sitting on the left side of the aircraft, I only caught a glimpse of Madeira once we banked to the right to start the final approach. Unfortunately, despite having the dying sun on my side, the video of the landing made very little justice to the dramatic views these approaches can offer. Finally, we arrived on schedule into Funchal's Cristiano Ronaldo International Airport, named after the island's most famous offspring. If you don't know who CR7 is, you may have been living a very sheltered life in the past 15 years or so. This time it was refreshing to deplane directly onto the tarmac, the balmy late afternoon breeze softly caressing your face as you walk down the steps. Coastline so close, you can swear you can touch it with your fingertips by just extending your hand. The terminal is small, yet quite airy and modern. This being a domestic flight, there was no immigration to clear. Bags were on the carousel minutes after we arrived. So, the second flight of this first leg of our journey met all the expectations we had. Okay, there was that premium element missing in the meals as I mentioned earlier, but for the small extra we forked out, there can't be reasons to complain. Anyway, thank you very much for travelling along with me, and see you in a few days for our return back to London. I hope you've enjoyed this video.